Thank you guys for joining us. This is the second Dialogues of the year. We're very thankful to the panelists for joining us today. My name is Caleb Lightfoot. I'm a third-year architecture student. During the dialogue, I'll be crowd surfing, and so at any point, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and I'll come find you and point this thing at you, and we can hear what you have to say.
Okay, I'm Jenna, and I'm a third year, and today I'm going to be the Googler. So whatever sort of topics or pictures or something that they want to refer to will be up on the screen for reference. So.
My name is Kate Hammers. I'm a graduate student, and this is actually my last dialogues. I was part of the group that started the discussion idea, and then eventually led to the dialogues. And this is the last one, and I'll just be taking pictures today. So.
Yeah, my name is Valeria Sierra, and I'm a grad student. And this is also the last one. We were part of the initiators, so just thank everybody who was really supportive of us starting this whole thing. And now we're going to pass it on to these new guys, and hopefully they make a good name out of Sierra Dialogue. So thanks everyone for coming today, and Maddie is going to go ahead and explain the topic. I will be tweeting. That is my role for today. So if you guys want to follow us on Twitter, at Sierra Dialogue, I'll be basically describing what you guys say and discuss about on the internet.
So I am Maribel Rangel, and I'll be the moderator for tonight. So let's get started. So our panelist for tonight is Dr. Clifton Ellis. He is the Associate Dean for Academics. He has a bachelor's in Architecture and History and French, a master's in Architecture and American History, and he earned his master's in Architecture and his PhD from the University of Virginia. Then we have Professor Maria Pervolini. She is the Associate Dean for Graduate Programs. Professor Pervolini attained her professional bachelor's in Architecture from the Istituto Universitario de Arquitectura de Venecia in Italy, and a post-professional master's in architecture from the Pratt Institute in New York. And then we have Dean Andrew Verneuil. He has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Princeton, a Master's of Architecture, and the Master's of Science in Engineering from the University of Texas, and the Master of Design Studies from Harvard. So this evening, we will be discussing architecture research. We'll start by quoting a quote from James Snyder about research. He says that it is the systematic inquiry directed toward the creation of knowledge. So we can start the discussion on how the architecture discipline uses architecture research or applied research in a systematic investigation to reach new conclusions and to critically answer questions to clearly defined problems. Acknowledging that architecture is a symbiotic field with many other interdisciplinary fields, we begin to question if architecture research is an entity of its own creation or a byproduct of many other entities. With that being said, this brings us to the question of tonight's discussion. What is exclusive to architecture that generates both productive and acknowledged research?
Both productive and what?
Acknowledged.
Acknowledged.
Productive Should I start?
Sure.
Well, as an architect, I think that you cannot disjunct your profession from research. And I don't know if I would like to talk necessarily always about systematic research. I would like more to initiate a conversation about research in many aspects, how research can be in many ways. Yes, as a collection of data, as a systematic collection of data, as an approach where you scientifically test what you are collecting and prove and try to understand and retranslate into a probably path that you are going into, but for me, research linked to our profession is everything. How can you design without research? And what do we research as architects? Right? We have a design research. Do we study precedents? Do we study what other architects are doing in order to see if those solutions are suitable and applied into our own solution? Or do we study processes? Do we study geometries? Do we study materials? I'm more interested into geometry, processes, and materials as part of an artifact, as part of a built environment, and how those constructed built environment are generated by the interaction of those three paradigms: processes, geometry, and materials. That's my approach to research.
I have a position that, my problem is I have two jobs. One job is being the dean, where I have to answer to the university. The university has a very particular agenda with regard to research. And let me explain that first, and then let's pretend I'm going to take that hat off and grapple with what is my passion about research and architecture. My job is, as a dean, is I have to represent the university's interests in research. There are two interests that are actually fairly simple. The first one is the university's reputation is in part affected by how much the scholarship, the creative activity, or the specific kind of research, material research or scientific research that makes it from within the halls to outside. In other words, the university needs a reputation. So everything that our faculty do, that our students do, that moves out into the community and is vetted in some informal way or formal way helps add to the reputation of the university. So part of my job as dean is to try to find opportunities for faculty and students to do anything really that has some public body, just to use that phrase. Now, the second objective of the university is fairly simple. It's money. The university needs to have a certain amount of external funding in order to be able to address its larger constituency, which is the state. The state puts money into the university to support its educational function, but the state, in a somewhat naive way, expects that the university will also bring in research dollars because the state understands that that will help both the state and the university. So the university is very much interested in what we call restricted research funding. And they gauge that every year. And our restricted research funding, I think, is somewhere around $40 million. We would like to increase that to $100 million. Now, the university understands that in order to build that, they have to invest in research. And so they're casual, and I say casual in a kind of loose use of the word. Their casual investment in research on this campus is more than $150 million a year. And that's in the portions of the salaries that each of us get as faculty members and that go into research. Every faculty member declares how much of their salary is research, how much of it is teaching, and how much of it is administration. So those are the two parameters that the university looks at, and in rough numbers, that's kind of where we are as Texas Tech. And the good news is that we're getting better every day. Every day it's getting more exciting. And so as a university, as an institution, that news is good. Now, I'll just say, just in a capsule, put that aside, but as an architect, I believe that what we do creatively is research. And quite fundamentally, I argue that shape or form is knowledge. And that if you change shape or form, you are changing knowledge. As you change knowledge, you get research. So that what we do as designers every day is research. It may not classify as scholarship in the most essential way, and it may not classify as science in the most essential way, but I would argue that it is just as important. And of course, to me, it's more important.
I'm an historian. So research in the profession of architecture is very different from the research that one would do in the history of architecture. So I'm not even going to address architectural history research because we would all dismiss very early. So I do find this question intriguing. What is exclusive to architecture that generates both productive and acknowledged research? And it asks, I guess, also what is the specific contribution of architecture to research, to the advancement of knowledge in any subject. And I think here architecture straddles that unique line between art and science. And we've always had this debate in architecture since the modern world, since the 1700s. Is architecture a science or is it an art? And but to argue that question is a losing proposition because it has to be both. It can't be either or, it has to be both and. So it is both a science and an art. And where we began to talk about research, then the art aspect, I think, is the most difficult to pin down in the traditional, within the traditional parameters of scholarly research. Because art by nature isn't something that can be systematic. And it's not always you're not always able to systematically document it and therefore come up with data that would form a database of research. Not always. I think sometimes you probably can. But this is where it goes into part of what Professor Pergolini discusses as process. Because the process of architectural is both, of the design of architecture, I think, is both based partly in the gathering of data and the analysis and interpretation of that data. But then what that data becomes is a creative product. And that is yet another part of the process. And we do this every time in studio when we first do our precedent studies. And we gather data in whatever studio we're doing. But then we go into another transition. With that data, we go into this process of creation, of generation of form, and generation of space. So what is exclusive to architecture then? I think the exclusive domain of architecture is in that both the complementary tension between art and science and research and creative activity, but more importantly, what's exclusive to architecture is the end product. And that is shaping the built environment. More than any other discipline, architects have the unique opportunity, but also the very profound responsibility to shape the environment inhabit. And so I think that is exclusive to architecture, and I think that's what makes our research, however you want to term that and define it, makes it all the more significant to the world, but also puts a huge responsibility upon the profession and the individual as an architect. And one of the things that concerns me is that our process of education is, for me, I think, too truncated. We do focus on the hard data. You all have to know the construction, right? You have to know the physics. You have to know the math. What else? Oh, those systems things too. You know, you got to figure out where the air ducts go and how the lights work and all of this sort of stuff. You're deluged with possibilities of the hard sciences that you have to know. And then you have to somehow integrate that into a design now, on the art side. And yet, we spend very little time talking about space as it actually affects the human body as it passes through the space. We study very little anthropology to understand how humans throughout history and in our present day actually shape and inhabit the space. And I think we as architects, as a profession, now has moved away from the actual, in some ways I feel like it's divorced from the public. The public doesn't understand architecture or architects as much as we used to, and now I think that is a failing of the profession. But it's also a failing of acknowledging the fact that now that we have more to learn, we need more time to learn it. And therefore, we don't have as much time to do research as we would like.
Go ahead.
Well, I would like to bring the discussion instead of exclusiveness on the inclusiveness of architecture and the inclusiveness of research within other disciplines. In other words, is architecture a discipline that can be producing research exclusively or by being together with other disciplines in an interdisciplinary approach? How important is for an architect to collaborate with other figures? And I'm talking about engineers, material sciences, physics, chemistry, computer sciences, all disciplines that are informing the research within architecture. I believe that alone we would not produce a acknowledged research. We need to be working with other figures, with other experts, and learn from them or share with them our knowledge in order to arrive to a research that is really comprehensive, inclusive of many expertises. That's a very important part.
Can we go back to the, sorry, because you just got here, and I think that's interesting. Can we go back to the quote that was about what research is? I think there are two things. There's a failure of that quote that I think is important, but the one from, what's his name?
Oh, the first one?
The first quote.
Systematic.
Systematic approach.
Right. Which I have no trouble with systematic. The problem that's missing here from this definition that happens before this, and I know this is true because I read it on Wikipedia, and I want to be very clear with that. From Wikipedia it says the creative work undertaken on a systematic basis in order to increase the stock of knowledge. And I think the important thing there is what's missing here is creative work. It's implied by inquiry, but that's a pretty flaccid connection. My feeling is that that inquiry could be anything. You could ask the same question over and over again, expecting different results. The definition of stupidity. But if you think about it as being creative work, that means the inquiry is a different set of objectives. And that's where I start to want to stake out a further position. While I agree with my colleagues, I want to stake out a position that's actually farther on down the road. And it begins with the word knowledge. Embedded in our name is architect. Techne is the Greek term for the way in which the fashioning of something makes the shape. In other words, there's embedded knowledge in shape. Notice, we all know that the paradigm for Greek architecture was sculpture. So maybe to some extent that is specifically locally attended or attached to Greek architecture, but I don't think so. I believe that in knowledge, or in shape, in form, there is knowledge because the form of anything is connected to the way in which it's produced. One could actually take a Marxian point of view and say, like that Michael Hayes does, that the form of something is indeed a critical, a culturally critical, a salient culturally critical critique of that particular society. If you look at Hannes Meyer's work, for example, the sort of assessment of that work was that it was culturally a critique of the society that produced it, because he was diligent about making the building out of the things that were made from that society. That is a Marxist critique of architecture. Now, architecture does a lot of other things besides that. And to think about where architecture was before the Enlightenment. Architecture was a way of evidencing, in an eidetic sense, certain abstract ideals within culture. Meaning that architecture was the common physical currency of communication, both religious and state communication, besides also keeping us dry. Then, if you think about what happened then in the 19th century, you think about the Beaux-Arts period, where architecture had a certain kind of intellectual presence in the world. It's important to remember that we did not come from engineering. Engineering came from us. The Pont de Chaussée was a break-off from the Beaux-Arts to create a new kind of engineering culture. But before that, architecture was engineering. So I get back to my point about making. Essentially what we do is we fashion the world. And what I love about that word is that it has both a design function and it also has a productive function. You can fashion something by hand or by machine, or you can fashion something in the sense of making it culturally relevant. So I want to get back to the position of, while everything, I agree with my colleagues, it's really important today especially to think about new materials and new processes, because man, like we got them. I mean, it's so cool. And I totally agree with Clifton. He said, we've got this balance that we're constantly dealing with regard to engineering and architecture, and it has to do with the way in which one supports the other. And you can't just say it's one or the other. I totally agree with that too. But I want to stake out another position. And that position is that when we do architecture, we do research. And you can take any process you can think of that describes how one goes through doing research. Take the scientific method, go through all the steps. Every step is what we do when we design a project. And I would posit that the problem that we have when we deal with design is that we are constantly encumbered by a kind of a mid-20th century sort of puritanical notion that everything we do has to be worth something in dollar terms or in number terms. And I think that's a position that's antithetical to doing research from a design point of view.
Could it be sometimes that part of our services are to be aware of many things, including precedent studies, processes? So does that validate our service as an architect, or does that validate also architecture research? Or is architecture research coincide with what we're expected to do?
Well, can architecture research be different from design? What is architecture research? What do you mean with architecture research? Do you mean design research? What is it? How would you explain architecture research? You, as a student.
As a student.
I'm asking Maribel, to you. Or to everybody. What is architecture research? Is it about form? Is it about space? Is it about materials? Is it about phases of design? I start with the sketch, with the schematic phase. I go through design development until construction documents and final ideas. What is it? I think it's embracing so many ways, right? That's why we were saying since the real beginning, we cannot design without research. Because anytime even if you would start to design by program, which is what I oppose, even then, you need to study what the programmatic approach is for a building, right? Or if you want to start with the conception of a spatial assignment exercise. What is space? What are the characteristics of a spatial exercise? What do I investigate? Proportions, adjacencies, height, transitions. You see, everything has to come together. We cannot just say, I research a library that was done before because now I am designing a library. Yes, but what do you research? You research the idea behind, the narrative, the concept, but also how the space is articulated and how, for example, light comes in place, material sustainability, structural issue, programmatic issue. You see how complex is our discipline. So everything requires attention, and more than inquiry, I would say, let's see if I have a problem. And I don't know if I can resolve it, and I don't know if I have the right answer, but maybe we can pose a question. And we can start with the question. Now, I saw the Georgia Tech. You were showing before Georgia Tech, yes, research lab. I'm using this, there is a faculty, I forgot the name, in my smart material class. They are studying nanotechnology as one field of study for responsive skins and responsive structures. And what is nanotechnology? Something that actually we start to hear more and more and more. And I'm discovering that here on campus, we have great scientists dealing with nanotechnology in many ways. And I already invited a couple of them in my class. And it's so fascinating because it's talking about future. is talking about something that we do not know completely what it is. Imagine that a nanometer is 1 million of a millimeter, is 80,000 thinner than one hair. And they study that technology applied to fibers and how they can conduct electricity within fiber and recharge your phone, your iPhone, just because it's next to your clothes. You know, or carbon nanotubes within structure which are part of nanotechnology exploration. So where do we go? That's the fascinating part for me of being a researching architect. That's how I would approach my profession.
We have a question.
Yes.
Back.
I have a lot to say,
Good.
but I'm going to try to limit my...
Speak up, please. I can't hear
We
you.
can hear you.
Hey, Caleb.
Microphone.
Do your job, man.
I don't know if that's... Anyway, I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to make it brief.
Microphone. Talk to the
Can you
microphone.
hear?
We can hear, yeah,
I don't
better.
know if this is just for the recording or...
Maybe, but talk to the microphone anyway.
I think the panel is being a little bit soft on what architectural research is. It seems to be that the conversation's a little bit, it can sort of explore many possibilities, but I would completely disagree that precedent studies are research. I think they're, if they are research, they're research light, if anything. But my direct question would be, the examples that are being used as what is architectural research is affiliated with other fields. And how do we consider that to be truly owned by our field in the architectural discipline? And if there is these moments of exclusivity to an architectural field, what is that?
I totally agree with that. And I think that's one of the problems we have. It's just like the problem you have with beauty. Everybody talks about beauty as something that's added. Bullshit. Beauty is not added. It's part of what we do. And the same thing is true with research. It is true that we have relationships with other fields, with other disciplines, but that's not what we do. What we do is we change form. We change and I hate to use the term built environment because it brings all these kind of connotations about the environment and green building and all that stuff is good, but that's not about what we do as architects. We make buildings, we design buildings, we make buildings beautiful. And we do it by research. And I agree with you, Jeff, it's not about precedent studies, although that's a place to start. The research we do is on paper in the computer. We change the shape of things, and the data we do are the things that we create, the alternatives that we create. That's the data that we do. And we mine that data just like a scientist sitting in a lab. And we take from that data certain realities that have some proof. Now, how does design work? Design works in two ways. It's a tool of inquiry. In other words, you use it as a way to ask better questions, or it's a tool of demonstration to show that the mini hypothesis you have for that particular piece of the possible design solution is proven in one way or another. How do you prove it? Part of the proof is with your eye. Part of the proof is with the performances that you seek to meet. Part of the proof is with those other adjacent performances that you are also trying to achieve. It's what Peter Rowe calls a wicked problem. It's not a simple problem. It's not like trying to find a bacteria. It's not like trying to figure out when the universe is going to end. Those are simple problems. What we have are complicated problems. That's kind of a joke. Okay, what we have are complicated problems because they are horrendously contingent. When a scientist sits down or an engineer sits down to solve a problem, they're looking for one solution. We're looking for a set of possible solutions. We're looking for, and to find a set of possible solutions, it takes research. How do you do research? You do it with proportion, scale, color, texture, rhythm, knowledge of precedent, knowledge of tradition, knowledge of social space. You do it with all those things that you have in your hand. Those are your instruments. They're just as good as a microscope. They're just as good as a measuring stick. They are the instruments that you do. And that's research. When you sit down to design a project, that's research. So I agree with you, Jeff.
Yeah, I see in every studio research and then boards with precedent studies. I agree, it's misleading. But somehow you have to start somewhere. And I like the idea of instruments or tools that you use to activate your own research. Do you need to know what was done before to activate something new? Yes, you do. But itself, per se, and the Corbusier building is not research. But of course it's activating maybe a new perspective, a new understanding of space, a new understanding of assembly, a new understanding of a floor plan elements. So yes, you need to have precedent studies at a certain point in the beginning, but yes, it's not research per se. So when I go in studio and I see students talking, oh, this is my research. Maybe it's not really appropriate to say that a precedent study per se, with a redrawing process, with images, as you do, right? They ask you, professors, they ask you to do that. This is per se is not itself research, but it might be an instrument. That first phase of activation of something that you might generate and transform into research.
Where'd Jeff go?
I'm back here.
He's here.
Well, there's another question there, but I wanted to ask first if what Jeff's response was to the dean and to Professor Pergolini.
Really?
Yeah, I think you ought to be up here. I ought to be back there. Do you agree?
You don't use precedent studies in your studio. And if you do, how do you use them?
Well, I think the precedents. And
Yeah,
I
as
think
they are,
students sometimes
precedents.
misunderstood that that is considered research.
Yeah, I agree.
And very, very little research, I believe, is actually done in the studios.
Yeah, I agree.
Microphone? Is it now? Can you? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know how far I should go with this.
Well, you should go because it's a dialogue.
I'm gonna use my compadre.
Are we going to faculty work?
I just think it's even the things that the dean was listing still is attached to other disciplines.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
creating buildings is still attached to
Yeah.
civil engineering, it's attached to structural engineering.
No, it's not. I'm not going to buy that. Creating buildings is not attached to civil engineering, so I'm sorry, I don't buy that. Creating buildings is designing buildings is architecture. Architecture is fundamental. Engineering it comes along for the ride.
Well, but there are buildings that are not, that's not architecture.
Architecture it's not incidental that when people talk about how a computer is structured, they talk about its architecture. It's not just a coincidence. It's because that's what it means. It is made the way it works. And that's how architecture works. But remember, architecture is like a machine. If we look at it's like a war machine. It cuts through the striations of our culture. If we want to refer to 1,000 Plateaus, for example. It is a way of interrogating where we are in the world. And that's what makes it so fascinating. And that's why it's research. Because where we are today is not where we'll be in 5 years from now. What every one of us are thinking about and doing today with regard to architecture will be different in 5 years. That's why it's research. That's what we provide for culture. And I can guarantee you, as somebody who has 2 degrees in civil engineering, that's not what engineers have.
But what?
But designing a building, I'm not sure if that's architectural research. I don't know if designing a building for a client, in whatever case, is equal to research. And I'm using that word in terms of related to other things. That if you're in the sciences or in some other discipline across campus or in some other field, that the research is, most of those fields do not require to have other participatory disciplines involved. That as architects, yes, we design and we do things way beyond in terms of engineers. And I think what it comes to is the only answer I've ever really come to in my own question is space. That architects' research maybe is really about space. Because what other discipline is involved as much as we are about space? We can talk about material sciences and envelopes and structures and all these things that we do organize and we do design. But we also are involved with other disciplines. I'm not so sure I completely agree, but you're leaning on
I took that hat off, and when I stopped talking about the university and their goals, I took that hat off. I'm just a colleague. Space is important, you're right.
We have another question.
Yeah, I'm gonna comment on what Andy said and what Dean said. He said we're looking for a set of solutions. We bring knowledge to that set of solutions. If you look at research as a function, as a mathematical function, we need other disciplines to input into that function. Because without it, we would just be looking at the same white piece of paper and not getting anything. You can't have a function of theory. Well, we can't, but it's pretty insane. But we do need, and then what would be your opinion then of that? Because research is looking for any set of solutions, or maybe not at all. Maybe, so why isn't research what it is, what Professor Nesbitt is saying? Thank you.
I'm not sure I quite understand your problem, your question, rather, the definition, again, I'm quoting the great source of Wikipedia here, the creative work undertaken on a systematic basis in order to increase the stock of knowledge. And my point is that embedded in the word architecture is technique, which talks about the relationship between making and knowledge. It is a fundamental concept. So when we talk about what we do as architects, we are involved in a creative process, creative work, and hopefully it's systematic. And yes, indeed, it does require us to have many knowledges along the way. But just to let you know, so does biology. And by the way, in case you don't know it, there is a fundamental change in the way we think about how life began, being proposed by a faculty member here at Texas Tech. It just came out. Dr. Chatterjee, who is with the museum, and his book is on the beginning of birds, which takes us back to reptiles and dinosaurs. He has a very interesting theory about how life began. He didn't create that theory because he restricted his way of doing research to bones of 500-million-year-old reptiles. He created that theory by thinking more broadly, by taking what he understood and by engaging other disciplines. So it's really quite an amazing idea about how things began. And here's the other thing, is it's testable. Now, so my point is that I don't care whether you're talking about biologists or mathematicians, but the most salient research is done by people who think beyond their specific boundaries. And that's true with architecture as well. When Le Corbusier looked at how to use reinforced concrete to create a series of particular housing types, And then he looked like the Maison Manol, Maison Citoyen. He was looking at those types of housing in order to understand different ways of living. He was thinking with materials that were beyond just the specific precinct of architecture. But anybody doing research does that. If you don't, you're not really doing research. And my point is that when the question was, what is exclusive about what we do, is we fashion the world. And we fashion the built world. We fashion the built world in a way that must engage research. Now, the point made a minute ago was, well, you know, a lot of architects just make buildings. And they're doing a low-level research. Well, there are a lot of biologists that do low-level research too. You got to choose where you are on that spectrum. Are you going to do this level research, or are you going to do that level research? I had a conversation with Mel Lawrence 2 nights ago. Mel worked as a residency student. He worked for Charles Moore for 3 years. One of the things he said about Charles is Charles was never happy with the solution. That he would get to a solution that seemed, and Mel said, it seemed okay with me, and then Charles would say, you know what, this doesn't get what I want, let's do another one. And sometimes it would go back two weeks of work. It's just, okay, what we learned from that is that that way doesn't work. Now let's do another solution. That's research.
I don't know if I need a microphone. I've never been told I do. I don't know if it's necessarily a direct question or just an interest. So I think also there's an exclusivity to architecture in that it's always a different problem. So anytime we are faced with, be it a client or a building or a space or material or Corbusier pushing concrete, we're never faced with the same constraints. And that's actually what something I think is different within our profession, that we always have to think of a new solution, not to the same problem, but to a different problem. And so this type of continuous or cyclical challenges allows our profession in a lot of ways to be scalar and allow our research then to be scalar. So when you start to really hone in on one problem or one constraint, it directly and indirectly affects all these other constraints and all these other situations. I say that word a lot, quite a bit. So how do we then, I suppose, I don't know if I actually have a question or if I'm just rambling, but I think that there is a notion of how do you start to hone in on architectural research. Where does it can go on for limitless bounds. And I do think that is exclusive to our own profession as opposed to others. So I guess I was just going to add that. I don't know if there's a question, maybe? What do you think, Dr. Ellis?
Yeah, what do you say?
Well, does the research ever stop? Like, I guess.
No, research never stops.
I mean, I guess maybe I'm
And that's not
thinking
exclusive to
any
architecture,
profession.
though.
Any profession.
Exactly, or any discipline.
Any discipline. So, what are, like.
Well, I was on a conference and Sarah Whiting, the dean of Rice, she says, you know, they ask her, so you're the new dean of Rice, what do you do? What is different from the old dean and what is going to be your school? And she says, well, we are going to be approaching architecture as a scientist, opening up questions, opening up problems, without thinking where we go, because we don't know. You know, you study a problem, you study the cure for cancer, and you don't really know when this will stop and if this will stop. And she said, I'm going to have the school with the same approach as a scientist. Exploring, asking questions, problems every day, yes, many problems. But somehow activating an energy of exploration, investigation, continuously, without stopping, endless almost maybe. And I believe that architecture is very, very close to be like this. Otherwise, imagine, if we would stop, what would it be, our profession? When do you stop? Do you say, okay, today is the end of it, and tomorrow you repeat what you did today? I mean, does it have even crossing a logic of stopping your mind? Why would you stop if out there our discipline finds stimuli every day, right? And I brought that video from MIT, the Department of Architecture, how students are touching hands everyday research, and how they are part of the research of the faculty, and how they are into labs, and how they really are activating several territories. They go into territories that are unknown, structurally, material-wise, technology-wise. What can we design and what can we construct? Did you ever think about it? As a question. Can we construct everything what we design? My class, I have a class system of inquiries. They are all MS, PhD, genius students. And they have those questions. They're, oh God, well, how do I answer to this question? And they say, well, but how do we build this? Why don't we have more of those buildings? And I'm thinking about Zaha did, which is one of the most active offices with those crazy forms that are actually there, built. She's very entrepreneurial in that. The office works very well in terms of design and construction, but we have one, Zaha did, but then we have many other architects that try to imitate Zaha did, and they are not so successful, right? So, can we design and can we build everything?
Zaha was a student at the AA when I was in architecture school, and well, we used to wait for a Lotus to come out because almost always some of her work was in there as a student. Lotus was a magazine that came out fairly regularly about architecture, and we really were excited about her work. She hasn't stopped researching, and the work and one of the questions that we ask that engineers and scientists don't ask is, what if? What if we did this?
Right.
What if we didn't do that?
Why don't we try?
Why don't we try? And that is the question was, what is exclusive about what we do? It's our process. We have a lateral design process, not a vertical one. A vertical process is, okay, these are the steps that I need to take in order to get to an answer. That's very much the engineering way. And you pick a model and you say, okay, using this model, these are the steps I take. And maybe the last couple of steps are just hypothetical. And that's actually the way most scientists approach what they do. We work on a horizontal plane. We pull many things together to come to a solution. The fact that the solution is not singular doesn't make it any less a solution. The fact that we pull work together on a lateral plane, on a horizontal plane, doesn't make what we do any less research.
So is academic research different from research done in practice?
Applied research.
Applied research.
I think it has to do with, I think what we do in school is research with a gross understanding of the variables. What we do in practice is research with a better understanding of practice, of the various variables that we deal with. And people who do this really well, like this semester, the Visiting Critic Studio is working with Mel Lawrence, Kate Hayes, and Mark Wellen, John Grable, and Brian McKay Lyons is coming in. Those critics do research, design research, at a very high level. But the reason they do it at a high level well is because they've done it every day of their life since they left school, each in their own way. And if we were to give them the same problem, the answer that would come from that problem, from each one of them, would be different. But that doesn't mean it's less an answer, and that doesn't mean that their process is less research.
So, according to James Snyder, research has come to be considered a major faculty obligation. So, considering that research has become a part of our college, how does faculty research inform our college?
It sounds like a question. I took that hat off.
Put it back on.
Okay. Quite frankly, this is a problem for us because the university wants us to do more research. The university wants us to, they want our faculty to be more engaged in the kind of scholarship, creative activity, and research that gets more things out in the world, more proposals out in the world, more ideas out in the world, more publications out in the world than what we do. And the second thing is, and quite frankly, there are other programs that do that better. The university also wants us to make more proposals for funded research. And there are other universities that do that better as well. What we do well is we create a more fecund professional environment. We have more relationships with the professional community. So the kind of work that we do is more professional. That's good for our students. It's good for their future. It makes us unique. And I would say we're one of the best programs in the country to do that. Maybe the best. But we don't do the research that you just talked about and the research that our university would like us to do. The question for us is, can we do both? I believe we can. I really believe we can. But we're going to have to change what we do and how we do it slightly in order to do that.
As a faculty, I'm talking as a faculty, not as a associate, I think it's our responsibility to do research and to have research in our daily agenda. Because if I am stronger with my research, I can be a better teacher, I believe. I have more to offer to you as my student. And so for me, it's very important to be active with research, personally. And I hope that, we will be doing this more and more and more. For example, our topical studios should be the studios where the faculty interest is applied to the studio. And you should be somehow nurtured by the research that the faculty is bringing into the studio. And you should embrace our interests and actually be not influenced, but somehow in touch with what we do and we like to do and our expertise. And not always this is the case. And we need to work on this more and have stronger offer, at least at the graduate level. So yes, I believe it's very important that the faculty brings the research in studio, at least. Yes?
What is the faculty's opinion involving students in research? Because I think it's not only faculty that has to be heard with, but also the students with the teachers.
Oh, yes.
Because it's a give and give.
Yeah, absolutely.
Us even from what we produce.
Absolutely, yes. I agree.
To me, in my opinion, it'll be really good and productive.
Yeah.
That's also
Very important.
There's a big push that has to happen. Actually, Dr. Hawk is always knocking on the door for involving undergrad research, which maybe is is sort of what Dean Noy is mentioning about how we can get involved. And it is both faculty and students. And students being interested in getting involved with some sort of other level of research. Usually the thing is, usually it happens in graduate school, at the graduate level. But I know that Texas Tech University is trying to push more undergraduate research. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I just know that Dr. Cochran is bringing that to if you're interested.
Well, at the undergraduate level, I think it's more difficult to involve students. I mean, because you are young, you are still in formation, you don't really know yet what is your interest and where you want to go, and it's still unclear. But yes, it's true, they are encouraging undergraduate research. They are also trying to push, for example, papers and publications with faculty and student collaboration in several levels, undergrad and grad. So, well, academia, yes, should be really a mutual approach to research, faculty and students. It's very important.
There's a reason we have 3 degrees, the bachelor's degree, the master's degree, and the PhD degree. In the bachelor's degree, you're still laying your foundation of knowledge. That doesn't, as you well know, you don't come out of high school with a sound foundation. You're still building on that foundation. So as an undergraduate, especially for the first and second years, that's why we have a core curriculum that you grudgingly fulfill on your way to the bachelor's degree. Nevertheless, that core curriculum is supposed to be helping you lay that foundation in your first 2 years. In the third and fourth year, at that point, where you're involved in faculty research, might be as, if you have proved the skills, is as a research assistant. That is, doing the basic archival research or data gathering. And then it's at the master's level that you begin to do your own. You establish your own question of interrogation, and then you begin to gather your own data, and because you've been trained how to gather it. And now here is where you put to use your tools that you learned in undergrad, that is primarily critical thinking and problem solving. You put that into the analysis of your data and the interpretation of your data to lead you to that first quote, the advancement of knowledge. And then you refine that as a PhD student. And that is where then you really get much more involved with a faculty member. But I'd like to make this point about research. What was the question? How does
faculty research inform the college?
How does faculty research inform the college? And this is where we forget this too often. And especially the bean counters across the country, and now our bean counting president forgets that by the time that you have become an academic and no longer have the respect of society, but you are trying to hold on to that modicum of respect that you can eke out from your students. What they fail to appreciate, the public at large, and certainly the politicians, is that those academics have been trained to think critically. And that critical thinking process is embedded in them like a computer chip. That every time we read a sentence or hear a comment, our critical thinking skills are on it like that. And that is what we bring every day, or at least the good ones, bring every day out of their research experience, whether or not they're producing something yearly or biannually or whatever. Nevertheless, their mind remains like a steel trap. If they continue to oil it with some reading, and some engagement of research. But where that benefits the college is the mind. That is a well-trained mind. And we bring that well-trained mind to class every day, and we pull you along, and sometimes push and shove you along. And oftentimes you're there beside us, and sometimes you take off in front of us, and that's delightful. And that's where research benefits the college. And that is where research benefits any institution of higher learning, is that it is translated directly into the way that we teach. Now, that does not produce a bean that anybody can count, but it produces an intangible culture of learning and of constant creative, critical thinking. And that's what we do here, I hope, at the College of Architecture, is that every class you go through, you're building on the way that you learned to think in the classes before. And that cannot be calculated into a computer program or an algebra or an algorithm. Voila. That's it.
So considering faculty research applied to studios and or classes, does the research then benefit the students, or does it benefit the research?
It's both.
Could some studios be more leaning towards more of the research rather than focusing what the students need to learn in the studio, or?
Say that again?
Could the applied research in the studio benefit more the research rather than what the students need to learn in that studio?
I think that if you bring your research in studio and you test, somehow it's a testing ground, right? You test the validity, not the validity, but somehow the discourse that you activate with your research, with your students. They will benefit if you have a clarity, if you have an increase of transfer of knowledge for them. I think that usually the students are judgmental. They understand if what you bring there has a value and it has a substance fundament, and they're very critical. And personally, I use my studio, yes, to not necessarily only a testing ground, but I share with my students what they do. I get energy from my students. Maybe I see a direction that was not visible before, and then maybe I try, in a different way what I was studying. So I guess it's a mutual, again, exchange between faculty and student, but it's not that I am initiating or concluding my research in class. It's just a path through the class, but then I continue and I explore and I keep going later after class. I don't know if I'm explaining well.
I think what my colleagues have said here is really important, because one of the problems we have sometimes is that for a good reason you probably think we have answers, and we have some. But if you listen carefully to what my colleagues have just said, what they're saying is that what's more important than the answers are the way in which we help you ask questions. That's what's important. In some ways, we like to leave you with more questions than answers.
That's always good.
But hopefully, what we'll pass on to you are not our answers, but a desire in you to continue to ask questions. Because that's where your excellence will be found.
An inquisitive mind, that's what this all is about, too. And an inquisitive mind is a critical mind, usually. So the question, does it benefit the student, or does research benefit the student or the research itself? I think it's ultimately both, because anytime that you're bringing a research question to the classroom and testing it out, you're inviting the student to begin a process of inquisitiveness. I would say inquisition, but that has, with the, that's my job. But you invite the student to be inquisitive and therefore creative in the approach to the problem, not necessarily solving the problem in that semester or even year, but simply asking the question. So I think again, it can't be an either or, but it's a both and. It benefits both. And it benefits faculty too. Our bringing our research before our colleagues is one of the first places that we tested as well. And then talking with our colleagues. That's why I love academia. It's a constant process of interrogation and dialoguing and sometimes arguing.
But I have a question for you, actually.
I'd rather not.
It's a sincere question, and we can talk about it later too, but I'm very much interested in the way in which our PhD program can take on a slightly different kind of problem. Instead of focusing, what if our PhD program would also start to look at design as there aren't many PhD programs in design. And the tendency, the model is to study design theory so that one can then regurgitate in a slightly different way another design theory. I'm actually more interested in, is it possible to have a PhD program that is about design by doing design?
Can I have an input?
Yes.
As a PhD student, before I applied to Texas Tech, I was looking through a wide range of schools, not just inside the United States, in Europe, in South Africa, in Australia, everywhere, and for a long time. And what took me here in the end was exactly what you're talking about. I was looking for a PhD program that was based on design. I wanted to do research by design and also design by research. I didn't want to do planning. I didn't want to do solely research, narrow down on a specific area. I wanted to do interdisciplinary, researchable design. So I'm very happy that this was brought up. Just as a PhD student that I just started here, I just wanted to say that this is exactly what I'm looking for here, and I would be very happy to hear Dr. Ellis's input on that, and hopefully a positive and
well, there you have it. Yes, you can, and we're doing it.
But you can, Nilaj, you can be our
spokesperson.
Yeah.
You're going out and recruiting.
And indeed, you'll be our case. We'll work on that.
Yeah,
that's great.
I would add to that. I think the possibilities for that, as design becoming research, has exponentially increased because of the way that we are integrating technology into design. And it does require the crossing of disciplinary lines. I use that term interdisciplinary very carefully because I still think that, and it's used far too loosely, but I don't think that will interest our audience that much. So I won't get into that preaching. So never mind. what I had to say. But it's still architecture.
It is.
And that's what the focus should be. Every other discipline borrows from other disciplines. And therefore, we are all interdisciplinary, but we apply it, and I'm talking about architecture and the history of architecture. The history of architecture has drawn upon postmodern theories developed in literature, taken up and furthered by anthropology, and with a little Marxist economics in there once in a while. And although we draw upon those theories that are developed in other disciplines, and although we take findings for, example, social use of space that are taken from anthropology and developed out of archaeology, what historians of art and history and architecture still do is in the discipline of architectural history. So it maddens me to no end to be constantly told by the university that we need more interdisciplinary this and interdisciplinary blah, blah, blah. And it just shows me how stupid they are, because we're already interdisciplinary, and I wonder where they did their PhDs. But that's part of our problem now, is with this program. It has taken interdisciplinary to its absurd end, so that there's no discipline within the discipline. And this is where I think it really, and you're doing the DBFs, really, it's concentrating on
I'm
DBFs.
doing that too.
Right. That's where I think that becomes, buildable form or exploration of the form, and it stays within the discipline, although we're borrowing constantly from engineering or from the nanotechnologists, wherever they reside, and the biologists and all of that. But it's still architecture. And that is where I would say, yes, we can do it, and that's why, although we're interdisciplinary, just like every other discipline is, we're still architecture. So let's not get lost in the forest of the disciplines and the interdisciplinariness of all the disciplines.
Actually, also building up on that, and earlier I just want to tie this in with what Professor Nesbitt said a little earlier. I wanted to comment that exactly like you say, every discipline borrows from other disciplines. It's not like engineering, for example, because we talked about it, we discussed it, they do not borrow from other disciplines. The most obvious field they're always borrowing from is math. That's another discipline. So I think what is kind of misleading us architects here is the fact that just because we call ourselves architects and we have that, I don't know if I should use this word, sorry, I'm not native, so I'm going to use it anyway. We have that kind of arrogance that we don't want to associate ourselves with other disciplines for the fear that they might want to assert some kind of dominance over us. We have forgot that we can do research in the practical field of architecture and bring in other disciplines and still be dominant. That's why
and still I think distinct.
Yes, that's why I think nowadays we're hearing the term interdisciplinary more for architectural, for a PhD in architecture, because we're little by little remembering the fact that this is how the research goes on. Everything is tied in. There is no distinct boundary between any two disciplines. You can't say, okay, I'll walk from here to here, so this is Belgium, now from here it's France. So it's not like this for scientific fields. You can't say this is math and this is mechanical engineering. No, it's not. And this is architecture too. Especially now that technology is advancing and we're seeing that inevitably architecture should, and has brought in technology in it to further advance itself. It's not something to be afraid of. So we need to be doing that and apply that in design. And still, rightly so, we will claim this as architecture and nothing else.
It's important to remember that discipline is a word that describes not content, but process. It's not accidental that one practices architecture, one practices law, one practices medicine, because you practice the discipline. You're practicing the process that conducts the research. It's not that you do something that has a particular the word discipline doesn't mean that you have a confined content. It means that you have a process that you continually evolve. That's a responsibility.
So I have a question about our graduate program then. In terms of, in terms of that specificity between product and process, in terms of architectural research's goal or ambition, is it productive then to have semester-long processes and then the next semester go to a different professor with a different research emphasis and just switch process there, or is it more productive to continually stay in the DDF certificate?
Great question. I love that, Kate. That's a fabulous question. The faculty's view, I'm somewhat saying this tongue-in-cheek. The faculty's view is that every studio should be like their studio. and it's important that they think that way. That's essential. But the reality of it is that the education is not made by the faculty. It's made by the students. To be a crucible of education, we have to have different faculty who do different things well. And that when we argue, the three of us argue constantly about how we can create the most fecund environment. And we don't all agree. And we have really serious, and I think for us maybe, I think interesting, but probably not for anybody else, conversations about how to do that. But essentially what we believe, and I shouldn't speak for my colleagues, what I believe is that you as students make your education. We only provide the environment. I believe that the most productive environment is where every faculty member is doing something and they do it really well. And yes, they may have a different process. Yes, they may actually be using a different methodology in their research. But what's important is that as you move through those studios, you pick up a little bit from this faculty member, a little bit from this faculty member. Because remember, we're old comparatively. And what that means is that it's your future. This is your world, this is your profession, this is your discipline. And the best education we can give you is one that offers a variety of approaches so that you, as students, and it's your responsibility, by the way, you can't float through your studio. Yeah, you can. Get a B, get a C, it's okay. And it doesn't matter about grades. But you can't float through your studio. You need to be involved with the studio, and really, the word arrogance is a good one. Don't figure, okay, I'm in the studio, I'll just do what he or she wants me to do and just, get through the studio so I can do what I want to do. That's not what it's about. Your faculty, each one of your faculty have, and I can say this, they have something to give you. You need to find it. It's your responsibility to get it because it's your education. It's your world.
What I'd like to reiterate about that is just that it's the student's responsibility or the student's initiative that has to happen in order to, from studio to studio, or from Land Arts to Comprehensive to Coon Park Studio, that whole summer. It's a whole summer. See, those things are very different studios, but it's the charge to the student to take what they learned from each studio and sort of have some sort of guess just your mind works.
Excellent.
Do we have any other questions?
This is a comment on this is a comment on how you build up your knowledge and how you bring in feedback from the outside, different processes. I feel today the speed in which you gather, not necessarily build up, but gather more feedback. We have now the possibility to know what UT is doing, what A&M is doing, what over in Shanghai they're doing. And all freshmen, our age, what they're doing, we can see it. We can probably just see the video of it. Drawing feedback, look at the portfolio and learn from them. And the possibility of them having at least a small layer, but still research of undergrad, but it's the speed. It's possible. I think it's possible.
I agree.
From here it's possible. I've always said that.
Oh, we have another question.
There's actually another comment, but what I believe when we started the first question is the specificity of why architecture and research go together so well is because we have the ability to have as many mediums that we want for creativity and creation. At some point, you can think that architecture doesn't need walls. I can create architecture with the ground plane, with the sky, with anything. We just need a different way to mediate that.
Great.
There's your next essay.
It's very good.
And this is, I guess, for the faculty as well. We would like to see the research statements actually on the wiki, just to be aware of.
Is that just did you put that up or what? It's out on my homepage. You can just go download it.
Yes, I actually checked it out.
Did you put it up there?
No.
You want me to do that?
Sure.
I don't know how to work the wiki. Can you do that for me, Evelyn? Just drop it or whatever you do with it.
Sure.
Copy, paste, flip, and then slip or whatever. Okay. Okay, well, there's a challenge to the faculty.
That's great.
It's already up there, so, okay.
I would also comment that I wish at this school, for this school to have a stronger identity. We don't have an identity. I don't feel it. I don't know if you agree with me. And thank you for your question. You know, I'm in a program and I have to take the studio of another program. Doesn't make sense. Well, maybe we can go in that direction. I hope we will. And be stronger in offering you the opportunity to actually focus on one interest that you have and be able to cross 3 studios within that interest instead to take 3 different. Yes, it's good for your knowledge, it's good for your experience, but at the end of the story, and I know, being I'm going in another direction, and that's why sometimes we have these discussions, right? And I think that would bring actually strength to each of the programs if we would be able to reinforce the presence of those programs with a trajectory, with a sequence of courses that are really focusing in one particular interest. And I hope we will be able to do it. I want to go there.
We do that with
Yes.
the Houston program. So that is something we could do.
Yeah.
You know, I'm interested to hear what the students
Because I think we reinforce our identity. We go to Texas Technicals, they offer that. And they are different. And I can get that specific set of skills that are important. Which we initiate, which we already are initiating that with our programs, right? With historic preservation, DDF, and urban design, and soon we hope that we will have a Master of Science in Healthcare as well, which is attracting a lot of interest right now. So.
I think we do have an identity, and I think it's one that was long established as the school, the more practical school. Go to Tech if you want to know how to build a building. And we've had students tell us, oh, I came here because it was more practical, because Tech looked too theoretical to me. And we're kind of a stealth theory school, because our faculty is changing, and we have a lot of more young faculty who are more interested in theory, but they maintain, I think, a pretty good footing in the practical. And again, I don't think it's an either or. I think we now are changing. Our identity is changing. And that's why I think it's perceived as a little nebulous. But we have the opportunity, and soon we're going to be able to realize that opportunity, or begin to realize it more quickly when we get the addition built and we get the additional space in which to run our CNC machines, our 3D printers, and our robot, where we become both the theoretical school that applies the theory. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, of course, or even within 5 years. But I think we have the potential to move, to straddle that gray area where there is no definite line, or rather, we will be able to smudge the line between theory and practice. Yes, and I thought of a Venn diagram, with architecture in the center. Usually the Venn diagram has those very, hard edges, and we're going to smudge those lines. And I think we are in a process of transition right now, and our identity is morphing. And I'll be interested, and probably dead before it happens, but I would be interested to see where it is before then.
That's great.
My death is not imminent, I hope. So
I meant your idea.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so do we have any other closing comments?
I just have a closing comment for the dialogue. I really appreciate what you all have done. You really created something, and I love the fact that it came from the students and it's organized by the students. And your questions and your propositions are so intelligent. I couldn't be more proud, so thank you.
This is Cade and now I don't think of the
Valeria.
Valeria. As I said, it's their last dialogue, which I've become so accustomed to seeing your faces that I just take it for granted you're going to be here next semester. I'm horrified. Although I did see your name on the graduation list. But I'd also like to acknowledge Jeff Nesbitt, who, when they first had this idea, Jeff gave, as a visiting assistant professor, he gave a lot of time and energy in helping you all develop this. So I think kudos are in order for Jeff.
Really resolved, and so I think the administration, the faculty, everybody has been extremely supportive of the students, and it's really because of what you guys have done. So let's keep it going, so that's inspiration for the next group as well. So thanks, and I think round of applause.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. We expect to see you all next semester. Thank you. Thank you for the panelists as well.